So there's been a huge update in the investigation into improper Russian contacts between the Trump administration and Russian contacts. Sorry. What happened on Friday was Michael Flynn apparently pled guilty to providing false information to the court and to the FBI. Well, to the FBI, I guess. And agreed to cooperate with Robert Mueller's investigation. So we'll go over this two-page information sheet first. And then there's a 6-page statement of the offense and a 10-page I don't know what they're calling this, plea agreement. So we'll go over them in that order, and we'll go over them carefully because I think this is really important stuff. This is quite a historical moment in American history. So this is a information sheet. The special counsel informs the court. Count 1, false statements. On or about January 24th, 2017, defendant Michael T. Flynn did willfully and knowingly make materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements and representations in a matter within the jurisdiction of the executive branch of the government of the United States. To wit, the defendant falsely stated and represented to agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that, on or about December 29th, 2016, defendant did not ask the government of Russia's ambassador to the United States, the Russian ambassador, to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the United States had imposed against Russia that same day. And Flynn did not recall the Russian ambassador subsequently telling him that Russia had chosen to moderate its response to those sanctions as a result of his request. On or about December 22nd, Flynn did not ask the Russian ambassador to delay the vote on or defeat a pending United Nations Security Council resolution, and that the Russian ambassador subsequently never described to Flynn Russia's response to his request. So he lied about that, which means he did ask the Russian ambassador to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions, and that the Russian ambassador did tell him that Russia had chosen to moderate its response to those sanctions as a result of his request, and that Flynn did ask the Russian ambassador to delay the vote or defeat a pending UN Security Council resolution, and that he did receive some kind of description or response to that request. So, starting there. Pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 11, the U.S. and the defendant, Michael T. Flynn, stipulate and agree that the following facts are true and accurate. These facts do not constitute all of the facts known to the parties concerning the charged offense. They are being submitted to demonstrate that sufficient facts exist that the defendant committed the offense to which he is pleading guilty. The defendant, Michael T. Flynn, who served as a surrogate and national security advisor for the presidential campaign of Donald J. Trump, the campaign, as a senior member of the President-elect Trump's transition team, the presidential transition team, and as the national security advisor to President Trump, made materially false statements and omissions during an interview with the Federal Bureau of Investigation on January 24, 2017, in Washington, D.C. At the time of the interview, the FBI had opened an investigation into the government of Russia's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election, including the nature of any links between individuals associated with the campaign and Russia, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. Flynn's false statements and omissions impeded and otherwise had a material impact on the FBI's ongoing investigation into the existence of any links or coordination between individuals associated with the campaign and Russia's efforts to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. False statements regarding Flynn's request to the Russian ambassador that Russia refrain from escalating the situation in response to the U.S. sanctions against Russia. On or about January 27, 2017, Flynn agreed to be interviewed by agents from the FBI. During the interview, Flynn falsely stated that he did not ask Russia's ambassador to the U.S. to refrain from escalating the situation in response to sanctions that the U.S. had imposed against Russia. Flynn also falsely stated that he did not remember a follow-up conversation in which the Russian ambassador stated that Russia had chosen to moderate its response to those sanctions as a result of Flynn's request. Remember, some of these sanctions were the Magnitsky Act, the sanctions from the murder of a lawyer who was investigating Russian corruption. So this is a big freaking deal. We're trying to figure out where corrupt people, where criminals are, using legal means, using the system as designed. And Michael Flynn is asking Russia to temper their response to our sanctions. In truth and in fact, however, Flynn then and there knew that the following had occurred. On December 28th, President Barack Obama signed Executive Order 13757, which was to take effect on December 29th. The executive order announced sanctions against Russia in response to the government's actions intended to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. Okay, so those sanctions are the sanctions we're talking about. On or about December 28th, the Russian ambassador contacted Flynn. On or about December 29th, Flynn called a senior official of the presidential transition team who was with other senior members of the presidential transition team at the Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida, to discuss what, if anything, to communicate to the Russian ambassador about the U.S. sanctions. On that call, Flynn and the presidential transition team official discussed the U.S. sanctions, including the potential impact of those sanctions on the incoming administration's foreign policy goals. The presidential transition team official and Flynn also discussed that the members of the presidential transition team at Mar-a-Lago did not want Russia to escalate the situation. Immediately after his phone call with the PTT official, Flynn called the Russian ambassador and requested that Russia not escalate the situation and only respond to the U.S. sanctions in a reciprocal manner. Shortly after his phone call with the Russian ambassador, Flynn spoke with the PTT official to report on the substance of his call with the Russian ambassador, including their discussion of U.S. sanctions. On or about December 30th, 2016, Vladimir Putin released a statement indicating that Russia would not take retaliatory measures in response to the U.S. sanctions at that time. On or about December 31st, the Russian ambassador called Flynn and informed him that Russia had chosen not to retaliate in response to Flynn's request. After his phone call with the Russian ambassador, Flynn spoke with senior members of the presidential transition team about Flynn's conversation with the Russian ambassador regarding the U.S. sanctions and Russia's decision not to escalate the situation. False statements regarding Flynn's request that foreign officials vote against or delay a United Nations Security Council resolution. During a January 24th voluntary interview, Flynn made again false statements about calls he made to Russia and several other countries regarding a resolution submitted by Egypt to the UN Security Council on December 21st, 2016. Specifically, Flynn falsely stated that he only asked the countries' positions on the vote, that he did not request any of the countries take a particular action on the resolution. Flynn also falsely stated that the Russian ambassador never described to him Russia's response to Flynn's request regarding the resolution. In truth and in fact, however, Flynn then and there knew the following had occurred. On or about December 21st, 2016, Egypt submitted a resolution to the UN Security Council on the issue of Israeli settlements. The UN Security Council was scheduled to vote on the resolution the following day. On or about December 22nd, 2016, a very senior member of the presidential transition team directed Flynn to contact officials from foreign governments, including Russia, to learn where each government stood on the resolution and to influence those governments to delay the vote and defeat the resolution. On or about December 22nd, 2016, Flynn contacted the Russian ambassador about the pending vote. Flynn informed the Russian ambassador about the incoming administration's opposition to the resolution and requested that Russia vote against or delay the resolution. On or about December 23rd, 2016, Flynn again spoke with the Russian ambassador, who informed Flynn that if it came to a vote, Russia would not vote against the resolution. Other false statements regarding Flynn's contact with foreign governments. On March 7th, 2017, Flynn filed multiple documents with the Department of Justice pursuant to the Foreign Agents Registration Act pertaining to a project performed by him and his company, the Flynn Intel Group, for the principal benefit of the Republic of Turkey. In the FARA filings, Flynn made materially false statements and omissions, including falsely stating that FIG did not know whether or the extent to which the Republic of Turkey was involved in the Turkey project. The Turkey project was focusing on improving U.S. business organizations' confidence regarding doing business in Turkey, and see an op-ed by Flynn published in The Hill on November 8, 2016, was written at his own initiative and by omitting that officials from the Republic of Turkey Guilty provided supervision and direction over the Turkey project. The preceding statement is a summary made for the purposes of providing the court with a factual basis for Michael Flynn, my guilty plea to the charge against me. It does not include all of the facts known to me regarding this offense. I make this statement knowingly and voluntarily, and because I am in fact guilty of the crime charged. No threats have been made to me, nor am I under the influence of anything that could impede my ability to understand this statement. I have read every word of this statement. I have had it read to me pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 11, and after consulting with my attorneys, I agree and stipulate to the statement of offense and declare under penalty of perjury that it is true and correct. Signed November 30th, Michael T. Flynn, defendant. I really want to know who the high-ranking presidential transition team official is. But let's now go to his plea agreement and read his plea agreement. Dear Counsel, this letter sets forth the full and complete plea offer that your client, Lieutenant General Michael T. Flynn, retired, hereinafter referred to as your client or defendant, from the Special Counsel's office, the government, or this office. If your client accepts the terms and conditions of this offer, please have your client execute this document in the space provided below. Your client agrees to plead guilty to the criminal information, a copy of which is attached. Your client understands that a violation carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in prison, a fine of $250,000, a term of supervised release of not more than 3 years, and an obligation to pay an applicable interest or penalties on fines and restitution not timely made. In addition, your client agrees to pay a special assessment of $100 per felony conviction to the clerk of the U.S. District Court for D.C. Your client also understands that, according to sentencing guidelines, the court may impose a fine that is sufficient to pay the federal government the costs of any imprisonment, terms of supervised release, or period of probation. Your client agrees to the attached statement of offense. In consideration of your client's guilty plea, your client will not be further prosecuted criminally by this office for the conduct set forth in the attached statement of the offense. Sentencing guidelines, they do a sentencing guidelines analysis here. Your client understands that the sentence in this case will be determined by the court pursuant to Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 11, and to assist the court in determining, the parties agree to the following: that the sentencing guidelines sections apply, a base level offense of 6. The government agrees to a 2-level reduction will be appropriate, and this is all with the sentencing guidelines. You have various levels, and it's sort of like a score, and the score determines what level of sentencing you should be subject to. Based on the information now available to this office, your client has no prior criminal convictions. Accordingly, your client is estimated to have 0 criminal history points, and thus the criminal history category is estimated to be 1. Estimated applicable guidelines range. At guidelines level 4, the estimated fine is $500 to $9,500. Your client reserves the right to ask the court not to impose any fine. Your client's estimated sentencing guidelines range for incarceration is 0 months to 6 months imprisonment. The parties agree that solely for the purposes of calculating the applicable range under the sentencing guidelines, neither a downward nor upward departure from the estimated guidelines is warranted. Your client acknowledges and understands that these sections apply only to conduct that occurred before the execution of this agreement. Your client understands that the sentence in this case will be imposed in accordance with the law upon consideration of the guidelines. Your client further understands the sentence to be imposed is a matter solely within the discretion of the court, so the court could decide not to allow this. Cooperation. Your client agrees to cooperate with this office on the following terms and conditions. Your client shall cooperate fully, truthfully, completely, and forthrightly with this office and any other federal, state, local law enforcement authorities identified by this office in any and all matters as to which this office deems the cooperation relevant. Your client acknowledges that your client's cooperation may include, but will not necessarily be limited to, answering questions, providing sworn written statements, taking government administered polygraphs, and participating in covert law enforcement activities. So he agrees to spy if he has to. Any refusal by your client to cooperate will be deemed by this office as a breach of this agreement by your client and will relieve this office of its obligations under this agreement. Your client shall promptly turn over to this office any and all evidence of crimes about which your client is aware. Your client will submit a full and complete accounting of your client's financial assets. Your client acknowledges and understands during the course of cooperation, your client will be interviewed by law enforcement or attorneys. Your client waives all rights in regards to that. Your client shall testify fully, completely, and truthfully before any and all grand juries in the D.C. And elsewhere. Your client understands and acknowledges that nothing in this agreement allows your client to commit any criminal violation. Your client agrees to the sentencing in this case may be delayed until your client's efforts to cooperate have been completed, so that the court will have the benefit of all relevant information before a sentence is imposed. You waive any challenge to venue. You waive any challenge to the statute of limitations. You waive trial rights. You waive appeal rights. You waive collateral attack rights. You waive Privacy Act and Freedom of Information Act rights. Your client understands the court has an obligation to determine if restitution applies. The government and your client agree that restitution does not apply in this case. Your client understands and agrees that if after entering this agreement your client fails specifically to perform or fulfill each and every one of your client's obligations under this agreement, the government will be free from its obligations. Your client will not have the right to withdraw the guilty plea. Your client will be fully subject to criminal prosecution for other crimes. The government will be free to use your client directly and indirectly in any criminal civil prosecution, all statements made by your client, etc. Your client understands and agrees the government shall be required to prove a breach of this agreement only by preponderance of the evidence, and nothing in this agreement shall be construed to permit your client to commit perjury or otherwise make any false statements. The government will bring to the court's attention at the time of sentencing the nature and extent of your client's cooperation, and no other agreements, promises, understandings have been made outside of this agreement. Signed, Robert S. Mueller III, Special Counsel. Defendant says he has read every page of this agreement, fully understands it, pleading guilty because he is in fact guilty. Signed, Lieutenant General Michael T. Flynn, Defendant. What do you think of that? That has even more information in it than I had heard in the news stories. It sounds to me like he really did act way outside of the president-elect's authority, who does not become the president, who does not have diplomatic authority until January 20th of 2017. So that seems to me to be quite an egregious violation of the law. And we'll see what happens here. It seems like there's a reference to a higher presidential transition team official. Whether that's the president or not, I don't know. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we'll share whatever happens with that with you. What do you think of that? That's a pretty big deal that I think we just read there.